It's Thursday on Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Happy to be back for another day. Hope you guys are having a great day out there as well. Really good show coming up. Jeff Day and Gavin Dorsey from the Star Tribune join me here in a few minutes to talk about name, image, and likeness. They are two of several writers with the Star Tribune who are working on a long series about NIL, its impacts, what it is, how it is turning college sports upside down, what exactly this all means and what exactly it is. So that will be in just a few minutes here. We'll have a long conversation about it, kind of where we're headed, where we're at, and how we got here with name, image, and likeness. It's a big day for the Gopher men's basketball team. We'll get to that a little bit at the end of the show. First, though, what I miss, it's Kirk Cousins week. We're going to move on from him pretty soon here, but he was introduced as Falcons quarterback on Wednesday evening in Atlanta, a later afternoon evening press conference out in Atlanta. I listened in on it because I was curious. I was multitasking last night. I tell people not to multitask, but then I do it anyway. I was at the gym. I was like on one of the machines and doing some cardio, watching Wheel of Fortune because I'm super cool, and also listening in on the Kirk Cousins news conference. So three things at once, not just two, three things at once. And I found it really interesting in three regards. So I want to play three little bits from it here that kind of illustrate maybe where Kirk's head was at as he went into free agency and as he was thinking about free agency. Now, the thing that struck me the most was in his introductory remarks. And here is Kirk Cousins kind of talking about what he sees are the ingredients for a championship organization.
And I really believe, as I looked around at opportunities for me in free agency, that when a coach told me this when I was a young player in the league, a coach I have a lot of respect for, he said, when the owner, general manager, head coach, and quarterback are on the same page, that's when you really have a chance to go win a Super Bowl. And as I looked at the Atlanta Falcons, I believe strongly that the owner, head coach, general manager, and quarterback can all be on the same page, and that's exciting for me. And so that's why I'm thrilled to be here. And
now that struck me immediately because it sounds like he obviously feels like he has that in Atlanta. I don't think he had that for a lot or maybe even all of his time in Minnesota. If you go back to when he first got here in 2018, you could tell that Mike Zimmer wasn't fully on board with this, right? I don't know to what degree he wasn't on board, but you remember Zimmer at the 2018 scouting combine as the Vikings were trying to make a decision on what they were going to do at quarterback. Were they going to go after Kirk Cousins? Were they going to keep one of their kind of lower price options and kind of keep their path intact? Zimmer was like, we can't make the wrong decision at quarterback. We got to make sure we still have enough money to spend on the defense that's been really good for us, things like that. And you could tell the relationship with Zimmer and Cousins was not tight throughout. It maybe came boiling to a head in their last year together in 2021 in that weird sideline deal against Detroit where Cousins gets in his face. You like that. Zimmer shoves him. It wasn't always like that. And they had some good times together, and Zimmer certainly praised Cousins, but in terms of the whole organization being aligned, I don't think everybody was in alignment with what the right decision was in that case. Then you fast forward to 2022, Zimmer and Rick Spielman are gone, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell come in. O'Connell certainly is the head coach that's in his corner. Adofo-Mensah and ownership, you wonder though, because neither of the people with the money, the people with the decisions, did not really work to make a long-term commitment to Kirk Cousins. They get here, they give him the extra year in 2023, and then they go back and they say, nope, we're not adding any more to this. We're going to stick some void years on it. And then obviously this year's negotiations only wanted to give him another year. So right there, you see the difference, or what he's saying is the difference. I don't think that was a intentional necessarily jab at what he used to have in Minnesota. Maybe it was, but saying that was what he was coveting with the Falcons, having the owner, the general manager, the head coach, and the quarterback all on the same page. Now, another thing he was obviously seeking in Atlanta, other than boatloads of money to add to his already large boat full of money, was commitment. And the Falcons gave that to him. 2 years guaranteed, That third year will he'll at least have $10 million guaranteed as long as he's on the roster right after the start of the league year in 2025, which seems like a foregone conclusion unless something weird happens with the rest of kind of what's happened here. So unless something weird happens, that's what's going to happen for him. But what he wanted was security, multi-year security, and he addressed kind of without exactly saying where the negotiations went with the Vikings. He essentially told us that with this quote.
I think in Minnesota, it was trending over the last couple off seasons to be in somewhat year to year. And as we talked with Atlanta, it felt like this was a place where, if I play at the level I expect to play, that I can retire a Falcon. And that was something that really excited me. And that's certainly the goal. And you got to earn the right to do that. But that was exciting to feel like I could get that opportunity here.
Which, of course, validates everything we've been hearing, everything our Vikings writers, Ben Gessling, Andrew Kramer, have been reporting along the way, which is that the Vikings weren't willing to do more than that kind of 1 year of security. Now, it does seem like, if you went back a year, the Vikings do seem like they were willing to give him 2 years last offseason. They were willing to do 23 and 24 guaranteed, but I think you could see the writing on the wall that after that, he would be kind of cut loose, and a rookie would be taking over for him, or that rookie would be a second-year guy by 25, but that they were intent on drafting a quarterback. And so he kind of made a bet on himself at that point and said, no, I'm not going to take that deal. I'm not going to extend it. I'm not going to extend through 24. I need more security like that playing deeper into my career. He gets that now with Atlanta. He's got at least 2 more years now guaranteed where he can, establish himself there. And he says he wants to retire with the Falcons, which is entirely possible based on his age. He'll be 36 at the start of next season, and the structure of this contract. Even though it's a 4-year deal, only a couple really guaranteed. But if he plays well enough, you can imagine it being at least a 3-year deal, which I think would take him pretty close to, if not all the way to the end of his career. Last thing, I found it interesting how much Kirk Cousins played up the Georgia angle in the reunion of coming back down there. Talked so much about how his wife's family is from there, how much time he spent there in the offseason. Here's just a little bit of that from Kirk Cousins.
Absolutely thrilled to be an Atlanta Falcon. Our family, my wife's family, have so many ties to Georgia, to the great city of Atlanta, and we're so excited to be here. I've spent 6 off seasons here training and being in the city, so it feels like home. It's been home away from home for so many years now. It certainly is home for my wife. We were married here in Roswell. Our younger son, Turner, was born in downtown Atlanta on Ted Turner Drive. There's a reason he's named Turner. Our first date was at Stone Mountain. I've frequented the Hartsfield Airport more than I would care to admit, so and battled traffic through downtown many, many times. So it's fun to be here and now be a part of the sports scene here. I've observed it from a distance for so long, and now to be a part of it is a real honor.
Now, of course, Cousins is a guy who knows how to try to win over a fan base. He's polished. He's a good speaker. I think he's still a little bit kind of, not shell-shocked, but he did seem a little bit just kind of caught up in the whirlwind. I think he needs to kind of get his feet underneath him. Kirk Cousins has always been best when he's been able to kind of dig into the nuts and bolts of playing football and not have to worry so much about what's swirling around him. And I think sounds like he's looking forward to that now with Atlanta. And of course, the Vikings move on now to Sam Darnold will be presumably their quarterback, at least for the start of 2024. We'll see who and if they are able to draft in next month to be Kirk Cousins' long-term replacement. I want to get into more of Sam Darnold tomorrow. In fact, we'll get into a lot of Vikings tomorrow because a lot of their new players, all their new defensive players, and Darnold will be introduced at news conferences later today. So we'll have some audio from that on tomorrow's show, I do believe. But interesting times for the Vikings. I like this new direction. I like where they're going. There's some uncertainty to it. Uncertainty carries some risks. Uncertainty carries some, trepidation. But overall, this was what needed to happen. And Kirk Cousins gets that fresh start, and so do the Vikings.
MGM Wine and Spirits is the choice for savings, service, and a great selection of spirits, premixed cocktails, wines, and of course, ice-cold beers and hard seltzers. With over 30 locations throughout the Twin Cities and beyond, there's an MGM near you. Head to mgmwineandspirits.com to find a convenient location in your area. Get social. Follow MGM on Facebook and Instagram for all the latest news and trends. Make great moments with MGM Wine and Spirits, your locally owned and operated choice for over 50 years. Save time, save money. Shop MGM.
We're going to talk name, image, and likeness on today's Daily Delivery podcast because it's been a part of a big series the Star Tribune has been working on. It's kind of all you hear about these days. You can't talk about recruiting. You can't talk about anything else right now without talking about NIL. Jeff Day, multi-platform editor from the Star Tribune, Gavin Dorsey, intern at the Star Tribune. Both of you are working on stories right now. Jeff, you've already written some stuff for this series already. Want to have both of you on the show. Rare double guest edition of Daily Delivery, but how you guys doing?
Very good.
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you guys. This was kind of Gavin's idea. So Gavin, I don't know if you remember this, but like a couple months ago, you're like working on NIL stuff. Would really love to be part of a podcast. Let me know if you have any ideas. Like we're getting in just under the wire. Like your internship's almost done, right?
That's true. I graduate college on Friday.
Good for you. Good for you. People are still doing that these days. Good for you.
It's so tough to hear that because I see Gavin around the newsroom and I think, here, me and Gavin, two young guys on the roll. And then it's like, yeah, this is a college student.
Oh, Jeff, we'll never be young again. Gavin, it's a young man's game. And it's a young person's game in NIL. Jeff, you did a really valuable kind of piece of service journalism. It wasn't just you. You had help from colleagues. Marcus Fuller has helped a lot with this series already. Randy Johnson, Chip Scoggins, like everybody's kind of pitching in on this. Editor Joe Christensen, like a lot of people have a hand in this. But you kind of did like this FAQ, like frequently asked questions. What are 10 things you need to know about NIL? And just kind of like sorted out. Like I think people are confused by it a little bit because things keep changing, which is illustrated by the fact that in the middle of working on the FAQ, you had to do some changing to it because new information has come to light. But also just because it's a confusing topic in general, and it's so foreign to the way we've thought of college sports for decades.
Yeah, and Gavin was a big part of the FAQ too. This entire process was, I think the FAQ became apparent as a necessity because we all were sitting in a room talking about the topics, building up the structure of what we wanted to report for this package. And there was this realization of like, I think even amongst intelligent people in this landscape of college athletics, people don't know exactly what this is, where it's going, what's allowed, what's not allowed. I mean, I think I go back to this whole thing. I remember learning that some collectives were operating as nonprofits and some were not. And I just remember thinking and learning about that and realizing the framework of what this is completely unsettled. And part of that FAQ was just to say, this is some of the things that we know. And even, as you said, while reporting that is changing. And I think the core thing of NIL you and I like to go kind of off topic on this sometimes, Ramball, but I have this friend of mine who works in the NIL space. He worked in athletic departments for a while. He is not a part of this series at all, other than I was talking to him about that we were working on this, and he reminded me, he goes, go read the Supreme Court language. Go read it and think about what they're saying, because I think the issue that is coming up time and again as they try to sort of litigate what is allowed under NIL stems back to that language, which, and I will read this because, I'm no lawyer. The NCAA had violated antitrust rules by restricting the education-related benefits that student athletes may receive. So this was the crux of it, that the NCAA for years had tried to sort of limit the ways that a player could make money. And those of us who are older than Gavin will remember that this came up in several different ways. My earliest memory of this is the Fab Five. And this idea that there was a collection of athletes who were so cool. There's no other word to describe it, even to a white kid from Iowa. It was like this was a foundation-shaking group of young men who had created a style all their own. I remember the black socks. It was like the most Nike creating these black socks. And it was like, man, they just had a whole different, it's like what a simple concept, a black sock, right?
Right.
But it was so identifiable with them. And part of this argument stems all the way back to these kind of notions of college kids who are making boatloads of money for gigantic corporations, including the NCAA, and receiving nothing in return for it. So That FAQ boils down to all different kinds of areas. How can players make money? What do they have to do to earn it? And Gavin can get into this. He's been doing a lot more research on this and reporting on this. But I think that the main thing that I just kept coming back to in thinking about what is NIL, it's this notion that the NCAA no longer has control. The Supreme Court decided that they had overstepped their bounds in trying to control this area of these student athletes' lives. And so I think you see that time and again whenever there's a court case, they have almost all tended to side with the athlete or the collective or whatever. Who they're often not siding with is the NCAA. And it's because the Supreme Court made a very clear ruling that they cannot restrict these education-related benefits. And that's why I think my personal belief, and Gavin, you tell me what you think about this, Rand, you tell me, but it's like, it seems to me that the NCAA's path for this is government legislation, that they're going to try to get some kind of congressional intervention, because it does seem like even if you're going to say, hey, the NCAA can't exert control, somebody needs to exert. There needs to be some kind of foundation. I mean, even in that FAQ, and this was something that Marcus really helped with, is this notion of where can you even find data? Where can you even find data on these players? I mean, at least with the NFL, the NBA, whatever, we know what the contract is. We know what the parameters are. We know what the endorsement deals, whatever it might be. So I think that the NIL continues to exist in this gray area. And I think it's because right now the question of who is in charge of this remains completely obscure. But I don't know if you two agree with that or not, especially you, Gavin. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you talked about like the regulation. I believe it was either today or sometime this week. Nick Saban was, in Congress arguing for regulations on NIL. You see everything pop up looking for, some kind of way to figure out how to get a handle on it. But essentially, yeah, it's exactly what you said. It boils down to with the NCAA no longer being able to have control. And I think there was specific wording. I can't remember if it was in the Supreme Court thing or in another ruling. And basically it said the business structure that the NCAA operates in is in no way acceptable in any other form of life. Any other company, if they did that, they would call it fraud. They would call it, over controlling, anything like that. Me as a college student, I'm not an athlete, but there is nothing that is stopping me right now from going and signing an endorsement deal. Say I have, thousands of followers just off of doing like journalism, stuff like that. There is nothing stopping me right now, or hasn't been anything stopping me from just signing a deal, making money off of my own personality. But for whatever reason, those athletes couldn't do the same because they were, I'll be honest, I'm on scholarship at Northwestern. They're the same thing. It's just the difference between, athletic or merit or academic or anything like that. So it's basically just been a monopolization of sorts. And yeah, I think, they're starting to realize it in all of the courts. And, there's a lot that's right. There's a lot that's wrong with NIL, but, things are certainly changing. And I think sooner or later, we're going to see whether that's for the better or for worse.
I remember going back. I don't know if you, Rand, you might remember this, but there's this civil rights historian, this guy, Taylor Branch. And back in 2011, he did a bunch of Pulitzer Prize winning work on Martin Luther King. He did America in the King years, right? So this was like a very heavy hitter in nonfiction reporting and journalism and all this stuff. And he wrote a piece. I can remember distinctly reading it. It was for The Atlantic. And it was basically a step-by-step breakdown of exactly what we're saying, that the NCAA for years had existed in a way that made no sense. It was a way of absolutely restricting the individuals that were working for them. And you see this now in, I think the earliest example of this is these Dartmouth basketball players unionizing and athletes kind of considering what is their role going to be at college institutions in this new landscape. But the part that I continue to wonder about is, is this just free agency? Or is this going to be structural in a way that says, hey, all of these athletes, just because, it again goes back to this question of is this now just professional sports? Is this the end of amateurism? Or is there an equitable way that they're going to try to distribute this amongst players? You know what I mean? Because right now that seems to not exist, right?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I feel like it's at the point now where, colleges are getting away with not having to pay for any of this. Now it's all coming from this third party. So they've kind of sidestepped the issue for now, but where does that piece of it wind up? Are people going to be satisfied with
kind of what they've come up with, this kind of middleman approach to paying players finally. Like that's the part of it that feels weird to me. Like where do we get to at that point where colleges still don't have to, like, all of the money is still going to the coaches and the programs. Maybe some of the donor money is going to the athletes now, but they've kind of sidestepped the issue of, are these guys supposed to be paid? They're getting money, but they're not getting paid by the teams and the schools yet.
That was why that story that Randy Johnson did was so fantastic about the Dinkytown athletes. Who are these two men that have suddenly stepped into this space to try to act as facilitators or whatever you want to call it? I mean, I think, I don't know how you describe these collectives. They operate in such a unique space. They are both connected and have to be disconnected. They control the flow of money, but they can't coordinate with the teams or the school. Again, and it's like, I think so much about colleges for years have built up this infrastructure, this kind of what I call administrative infrastructure at athletic departments to facilitate this kind of thing, to facilitate the way that they are going to support student athletes. We're going to give them a certain kind of college experience. We're going to give them a certain kind of stipend. We're going to give them room and board, all of these basic things that we think of when we think of a college athlete. And now that is completely removed from this equation. You know what I mean? It's what makes us feel so unsettled, because the college still feels like such a core component of this. And yet we all, as we've been talking about, it's just not the case, and instead it's two guys who have a deep passion for Gophers athletics who are kind of trying to help steer the ship, and then the U building a compliance relationship between them. But I just think it's fascinating.
Yeah, Evan, what do the athletes think about this? You've talked to a whole bunch of like current athletes, especially Gophers, high profile athletes. What do they kind of like, what's their take on this? I mean, I'm sure they're thrilled to a certain extent. They can get paid. They now have like this, avenue to be successful in business before they go pro, and a lot of them won't go pro. But like, what's their kind of their mindset and how they approach this?
Yeah, so the key word that you're going to hear from athletes and regarding NIL and stuff, and especially in the story that I have that's coming up this weekend, will be brand. Everything now is about building your own brand, whether that's, as a player and all of my athletic talents are this, or it's, I am marketable, I am conventionally attractive, or I'm a good public speaker, or any of these other things. Everything that you do through social media and through public appearances and everything like that is now about your brand. And so for a lot of the athletes, and I can't speak to everyone because, I could go down to the SEC and there's people getting $1 million deals, and, there's people who only want to play for this, for, however much money they're going to make. But among the athletes that I spoke to here, a lot of it was about how can I best position myself for the future? And so for some of them, that is, I do these brand and sponsorship deals so that I have money that I can put in my savings account. I spoke to Parker Fox, said he opened his first Roth IRA account, which is pretty exciting. And I know a lot of the other players that I said, or that I spoke to, said, I really, saved a lot of it. Maya Hooten, the gymnast, said that she was able to study abroad with the money she got. And so there is a little bit of a financial component to it. And I'm sure people who, maybe grew up in a place where money wasn't easy to come by, that money can be life-changing. But also it's about the connections that you get from NIL. So Dinkytown athletes, I want to say they had like 27 or something connections with companies in the Minneapolis area, 6 of them who are Fortune 500. And I know that, there's this understanding that at some point in time, the ball's going to stop rolling, or, you might not be an athlete forever. And making those connections for whatever job, whatever career you're going for is going to last. And so I know a lot of the stuff with athletes and NIL, it's about who they can meet, who they can, connect with. And if they get money out of it, that's great. But a lot of it is about what's important to them, specifically for, the Gopher athletes I spoke to. So like there's examples in the story of, Mara Braun builds her platform, her brand, and then uses it to raise awareness and raise money for the Special Olympics in Minnesota. And Cody Lindenberg, he donates 100% of his like proceeds from a t-shirt brand that he is partnered with to this foundation of a former football player at his high school who died from brain cancer. And so NIL to the athletes is just such this complex thing that you can really do whatever you want with it, whether it's I want to give back or to the community, or I want to advance my own personal goals, or I want to make money. There are so many different things that you can do with it. And in the space that you can get agents now who have good advice, and the Dinkytown athletes people are, I've been told, very good about helping them get deals and stuff. It seems like they're more equipped than ever to really take on a new role in this NIL space and figure out what they want to do and what values are important to them.
Well, it's good for Parker Fox because he's close to retirement age already because he's been in college for like 15 years. Now, I'm giving Parker a hard time. He's awesome. He's great on social media. Let's actually, Gavin, you talked to Parker. Let's play a little clip right now of him kind of talking about some of those very things you were talking about a minute ago.
As a a student athlete and somebody that's hoping to be a professional, whether it's in sports or whether it's in whatever you do professionally, you want to build your brand, you want to create a good image for yourself. So I think NIL allows you kind of benefit off of that good image. So for myself, it's I was here before the post the pre NIL era to the post NIL era, and I don't think it changes the way that you kind of build your brand or show who you are as a person, but now it allows us to kind of, make money off of that. So I think it's a great tool to allow student athletes to kind of benefit for who they are on and off the court.
Okay, so couple more big things that I want to get into. One, like just how this factors into recruiting. Like this has become like you hear, the deals these people are getting, like players, like star athletes, like it's absolutely factoring into who's going where. Transfer portal stuff, you're hearing like, oh, well, they offered X and this is why this player's leaving, things like that. Like, how do we kind of reconcile that? That feels like the piece where that's the major disruption or the potential for disruption to this whole kind of sense of, hey, they're going to a school because they want to play there. They could be going to a school there because they want the money, and that's okay now, right? They can just schools can just do that now, right? That was the recent ruling.
That was the Tennessee ruling, and
yes.
I also think it's manifesting in the way that I think about recruiting now is that recruiting is no longer ever completed. I mean, that's where I think the major disruption in recruiting is.
Yes.
And we're seeing that now with like the offseason for many of these teams begins when their players announce in some fashion, and Dinkytown Athletes was a core component of this for the Gophers this year, that they're staying, that they're going to remain here. And coaches, I have heard stories about how the transfer portal, because I do think the transfer portal plays into this. I don't think you right now can talk NIL without talking transfer portal because of this element of recruiting. When does recruiting end for your players, for the athletes that are on your team if you're a coach? I mean, it just feels like it doesn't end anymore.
No.
And I just have heard stories about how, a player does not even need to tell a coach that they are leaving the program. They go to a compliance officer and say, I'm entering the transfer portal and I'm leaving. Now, why they're leaving is the grayest area in college sports. And I think it's what really gets fans sort of inflamed is when a great player leaves. We've seen this in Gopher volleyball now for 2 straight seasons where they lose a really, really, they lost 2 really good players one year, and then last year, this offseason, they lost Taylor Landfair. And the gap that is created in this modern economy where you don't exactly know what is happening. Is there tampering going on? There is 100% tampering going on. Boosters are talking to players in front of coaches. There are people that are and there's no compliance. There's nobody that really has to be watching out for this because it's such a legal gray area, as opposed to maybe as it was when the NCAA had a total control over some of this, that it just becomes this space of like, when you are recruiting a player, you sell them initially, you get them a deal. Who was Bucky Irving, right? This was the first big ripple for the Gophers when they lost him to Oregon. And that's why when Gavin was just talking, I was like, man, this is so much more wholesome than the kind of stuff that is bantered about with this, because I think it kind of goes to what he was saying, this question of paying to play. You can do that now. That's what that Tennessee judge said. Does that mean every player is going to do that? No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. Does it mean that every player approaches a recruiting conversation with money at the forefront? No, it doesn't. But it means that some can, and if it's important to them, or it's a way for the school to try to, get them involved in that recruiting process, it's now a lever they can pull. And it just, again, adds to this layer of college athletics, to me at least, seeming completely unmoored. Players are not there for any set period of time. They can leave as they want. This was also another court ruling that we just had, right? They can transfer twice without sitting out. All of these laws that are rules, laws, whatever you're going to say, that are being challenged continually keep saying the athlete is in control. And now it's up to the colleges to decide, okay, if the athlete's in control, what do I sell them on,
Yeah, and you reminded me of a podcast I did a couple of years ago with, I think both Lindsay Whalen and Ben Johnson were on the same show, and we were talking about like modern recruiting. And obviously, Lindsay was the women's basketball coach at that time. Ben Johnson was new to the Gopher men's job, and they were basically saying, "Look, like I have to recruit like 3 different things every time now. I have to recruit high school athletes." I have to recruit my own players to stay, and I have to recruit the transfer portal. And it probably was a little bit like that before. Like you always wanted to make sure everybody was still happy and not going to leave. And yeah, maybe you were taking a look at the outside, like, hey, who's leaving that school? Who says they're going to transfer? But it is now that they don't have to sit out. Now that there's the money going back and forth. Now that it's just accelerated, that everybody can just enter this portal and your name's right there. It has gotten way harder. And again, that's not exactly what NIL is, but Jeff, you made a good point. Like you can't talk about the portal without talking about NIL and vice versa, right, Gavin?
Yeah, I mean, so the National Letter of Intent Day is what, December 7th, something in that second week of December. And, it used to be that signing that letter means that, you are contractually required to go to that college, and it's your "I am going to go here" statement. We have seen so many times players will sign that letter and then, transfer portal opens, whatever. And then maybe in like, April or even as late as May, maybe after spring practice or something, they're like, oh, I don't know if I want to go there anymore or something like that. And I mean, essentially, it's kind of the what it all boils down to is that, with whether it's unionization or anything like that, is that the players are employees now. And just like any other employee of any job, if you get a deal for, a contract for 4 years at this job, and you don't like the way that they're being treated, or you don't like the way the organization is run or something like that, you can leave your job. And it's a very similar way to this. Like if you see another opportunity that's better fit for you, now the transfer portal allows you to do that. So in a way, it's kind of mimicking the workplace in, this is what the real world is like. And since your athletes are now making thousands and thousands of dollars, they now can afford to, maybe take some leaps and bounds and really put themselves out there and bet on themselves. I mean, you think about all these players that, are 4 or 5-star recruits, transfer in the portal and then never get another chance to play again because they keep hopping and hopping and hopping. I mean, essentially, you are betting on yourself just the same as an employee leaving their job would.
Or just the same as a college coach would before. Like, college coaches would change jobs. They would take the next best job, get paid more. And the argument was always, well, why can a coach do that and an athlete can? And now the balance of power, like you guys are saying, has shifted to the athlete. But like both of you also have kind of hinted at or said, like, there does need to be like some framework put around this because it doesn't feel sustainable right now. It feels too wild. It feels like nobody knows what to be watching for or how to watch it right now.
This is the duality of this entire era that we have right now, at least for me as a sports fan. Because I remember back in the day thinking, this is ridiculous. There is no world where these college athletes should not be able to make money. It makes no sense. It's basically a sort of monopoly of young athletic excellence that cannot be paid. I mean, it was just crazy. And yet, I sit here today going, this is also crazy. We didn't go from one extreme to a more normalized middle. We went from one extreme to a radically different extreme. And now, Gavin, you can tell me if I'm wrong about this because you are a young man and I am becoming older by the minute. I think part of what gets me especially concerned about this is that these are still young people. the influences that are upon them, the people who are advising them, do they have their best interests at heart? Are they pointing them in the right direction? Who's making sure that they're making decisions that are actually going to benefit them in the long run? I mean, these sound like the overbearing thoughts of somebody who wants to control a young person. I understand this.
Won't someone think of the children?
Please. But no, I mean, seriously, it's like, I just think it's a space where you're like, it'd be nice if there was, because like, for instance, for me, right? I work at a company. So does Michael Rand. Gavin, here you are, you're starting your trajectory in the field that you want to pursue, right? I think we all try to find the structure that in that place. It's not like you go into your professional life with no sense of help or trying to establish yourself or sort of foundations that you walk into. But with NIL, there is no foundation. It's just wild. It just feels like there's no control over it. And so that's why my brain is always flipping back and forth between, yes, of course, like these athletes, like I think about, for me personally, it's like I'm always thinking about how great it is that these volleyball players can get a little bit of money, get a little bit of something, get a little bit more attention. They have great platforms. They have huge Instagram followings. Like these are popular people who deserve to be recognized in that space. And yet there's this other part of my brain that's like, I hope whoever is advising them has their best interest at heart and they're doing things for the right reason. I mean, it sounds paternalistic because I remember what it's like to be young. And Gavin, you might know more about this, but it's like some of these contracts you are signing away. What are you signing away? Your name, your image, and your likeness. What does the contract say? Who's advising I mean, I know that Gavin's done some looking into this. So it's like you also become you not only become an employee, but you become your own business once you sign into an NIL collective. You have to pay taxes. You have to do these kind of very adult things. So anyway, that's my rambling way of just saying, I think you're right, Ramball, that it feels a little bit just like there isn't a firm direction on what this looks like or what it's going to look like.
Okay, I was just saying, I think it's really interesting because, you always hear about these these horror examples, like, oh, these people are giving them awful advice and things like that. But, you see that plenty in the real world as well. Like, there are plenty of smart college students and there are plenty of dumb college students. There are people with great advisors and there are people with bad advisors. Like, I trust what my parents say. I happen to think that my parents, give me good advice. There are probably some other people that trust what their parents say and their parents don't give them good advice. That's true whether you're a collegiate athlete, whether you're, going into the field trying to decide what job to accept. And I think the difference now, I think you're going to find those cases anywhere. But the difference now is that the athletes are getting, while there is, not a ton of regulation, the athletes are getting, trained advice from trained compliance officers and people at the universities. The Gophers have specific people that they have hired to work with these athletes and say, hey, if you decide to enter the portal, this is what's going to happen. These are the potential good things that could come out of it. These are the potential bad things. And so I think you're still getting the same amount. You're still just at risk for bad advice as you are for good advice. But universities are trying their best to make sure that their athletes are the most well-informed and that they can get. There's nothing stopping anyone from having a really bad agent. Just like any football or anything, you could always have an agent who gives you bad advice. It's the same thing as college sports. And I think it's overall NIL is, as we mentioned, just kind of blurring the line between amateurism and professionalism, as a lot of the things that we see in college are starting to reflect the pros.
Royal Credit Union's smart checking accounts offer no monthly fees and no minimum balance. Enjoy financial freedom when you open your Royal Credit Union smart checking account online at rcu.org/go-checking. Insured by NCUA.
I think we're going to end here just because we could go on for days. We could do like 5 special episodes, just like you guys are doing this whole series on it. I want everybody to go read everything that's out there already. There's, we've collected it all up nicely for people, and there's more coming out still. Like we said, Gavin's got his story on the athlete perspective. Jeff, you're working on a thing about the donors and kind of where that's all headed, and that should be out a week or so from now. Just like any
a
final,
week or so from now? Jeez,
what's that?
Is that when my deadline is, Ramball?
I don't know. Sometime it's coming out soon. It's coming out. It'll be coming out in the future. It hasn't come out yet, but it'll be out in the future. Anything like? Do you have like one overriding takeaway from everything you've learned so far that you want as like a summary, or like hey, this is what I want everybody to know about this. If you only know one thing about NIL, here it is.
Gavin, you go first. I feel like you got something good.
I feel like this whole episode I've been like the overwhelming optimist in regards to these. Like everything that Jeff says, I immediately like cancel out with, oh, it's not like that. It's a lot of them do good things, and I think the biggest takeaway is that we know a lot about NIL now that we didn't before, and yet we still know nothing at all. And so I think more is going to become clear. I'm very fortunate that a lot of the Gopher athletes that I spoke to, it really seemed like their priorities were like, oh, I want to get a good education and I want to, be with a program that, means a lot to me and matches my values and stuff like that. And so it was very refreshing to see that, a lot of the athletes are still in that, the glory days kind of mindset of, oh, you go to college, you expect that you're committing there for 4 years and things like that. But also, I think it's important to know that NIL doesn't just make every athlete a millionaire. Like it's going to change some people's lives, yes, but a lot of times it does so much more. It's about so much more than the money. And I hope that through this NIL series, we've kind of been able to showcase that to a lot of people who maybe didn't know as much about it before.
Jeff, do you have a skeptical counterweight to that?
Actually, no. This goes to some reporting that I'm doing that will be in this story that
in a matter of minutes, it'll be online.
Yes, I approach NIL from maybe a skeptical viewpoint, but in talking to the people around the U, not just U athletic administrators, but people who wanted to give money to the U, who care about the U from that perspective, one of the things that has routinely come up is that the U is being very diligent about their processing of this, of trying to not jump, feet first into something, but to take their time and to understand it. Now, I think for a lot of fans, that created a sensation of we are behind. We are losing this race. But I think for the athletes and for the coaches and for the people around the university, in retrospect, and we say retrospect even though this is a very new phenomenon that is taking over college sports, I think they're starting to respect the element of that patience and trying to, have administrators who are trying to understand it from a respectful point of view and a collective that's trying to understand it from that point of view too. But I still think that my overwhelming feeling, if I'm being honest, is that this is the end of amateurism as we know it. I think the courts are going to keep playing this out. The arguments that the NCAA or that conferences or whoever are going to make, they're going to lose. It's just a feeling that I have based on every court case that has been decided so far. And eventually they're going to have to really reckon with, are we still an amateur model? And if we're not, what does that mean? What does it mean for the athletes that Gavin are talking about who maybe, exist in a completely different realm than some of these other athletes that are making a great deal of money? Is that inequality something that you want to have in your space of college athletics? If it isn't, what does that mean? If it is, what does that mean? I mean, I just think it remains one of the most fascinating. I was saying that you'd have to go back to, I don't know, Title IX probably would be the last seismic shift of this level. I just feel like it's a complete shifting of college athletics, and we're still processing it. And I'm with Gavin, though. I will say this. I do think there are people who are really trying to do this in a smart way. And when you were telling those stories about athletes giving back and like trying to do things that are meaningful to them and have charitable, ideas at their core, it's like, man, that's a beautiful thing. That's like a really great. And you know what else is great? An athlete like Bucky Irving, who maybe was looking for life-changing money and got it. That's great too. So it's not like there's not good things that can come out of this. But my overall feeling is that this is going to continue to completely shake college sports until it looks like something different.
One other thing I wanted to add is that I don't know if it's a prediction or not, but I do think that it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I mean worse in the way that everything's like unregulated. I see everything as, we're kind of at this middle ground. And in order to, get to a place where athletes are getting paid fairly and everything works well, you kind of have to tear everything down first. And I think, the courts kind of did that with saying, hey, everything is legal. And then once you kind of say that and you tear everything down, you can figure out what regulations you're going to put in place and exactly what needs to be done. Because it's very clear that there's a lot of good being done with it. And, you're like, maybe you don't need to regulate some of that. But I think overall it was just necessary to tear everything down. And I think with the next few cases that we're going to see over the coming years, it's going to completely dismantle it. And then I think they're going to slowly build it back up. We are still a long way from the end of this.
The FAQ will be being updated, I think is what Gavin is saying. Also, we should talk about this quick, Rand, before we go.
Okay.
We are 3 people who have not sold our name, image, and likeness. We are available. Cadbury eggs. I don't know what you guys are into, but I'm just saying that if anybody out there is listening and is looking for a sponsor, a brand ambassador, Gavin is younger. So he has that sort of Harry Styles kind of, youthful exuberance about him. Ramball and I a little more worldly, but we are available, I think, as a group.
My brand has always been tacos. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. This was awesome. I hope everybody reads everything that is part of this series and found this conversation to be, not only enlightening, but also informative, kind of give you a baseline of here's where we are and here's where we might be going with a very complicated but meaningful and relevant subject in college sports. Jeff Day, Gavin Dorsey, appreciate it, and good luck with the rest of the series.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great stuff from Gavin and Jeff. Can't say enough about how much I am impressed by Gavin Dorsey, our intern. He's done great work for us, and I'm not just saying that because he is a fellow native of Grand Forks, just like I am, just a little bit younger than I am by 20-odd years, but a really good guy, a really smart guy. He's done some really good, thoughtful work for us. That time is coming to an end now, and he's finishing up school, but I'm really, really happy that we were able to get him on the show, really happy that we had him here as an intern this year. And, of course, Jeff Day, always great on this podcast, so thanks to both of those guys for joining me for that thoughtful, long discussion on name, image, and likeness, and certainly go and read their work when it is published online and in your Star Tribune. Really quick in the cooler, 2 quick things. One, Harrison Smith coming back to the Vikings. The more things change, the more things stay the same. He's been here since 2012, the longest tenured Viking by a long stretch. He takes a pay cut. He's going to do at least one more year now with the Vikings. I like that. He was still playing at a pretty high level, I thought, last year. He really was thriving in what Brian Flores wants to do. I don't think they quite have the safety depth yet to cut him loose. So good move for the Vikings, good move for Harrison Smith. One more year at least. And got to mention, Gophers against Michigan State. That tip-off won't be very long from now. Big Ten men's basketball quarterfinals. Feels like, the Gophers would need to go on a run and win this tournament to have any chance of making the NCAA tournament, but it does feel like the way they finished the year, it was such a promising year, but now they're on this kind of stumble right now. Feels like an important game for them. They would like to probably finish this a little bit stronger. I'm sure there'll be, NIT possibilities for them, but not on their home court, but in their home city. This Big Ten tournament's in Minneapolis, just like the women's tournament was. I feel like there's a need to put forth a good performance today, so I will be watching for that as well, and I'm sure we'll talk about that on Friday's show. Bobby Nightingale Jr. will also join me on Friday's show to talk Twins, so plenty of good stuff coming up. Until then, enjoy the rest of your Thursday. I'm Michael Rand, back at it again tomorrow.